Hi, I'm Coelho, and today in this video I would like to talk about low end or a tight low end or why your low end sucks. Well, it probably doesn't suck, but yeah, what we can do to actually get a really nice tight low end that will hit in the club, that gives you the energy, that thrill in your heart when you're at a festival, or that shaking in your belly when you're at a club and you just feel that low end vibration hitting just right, and likely why you're struggling to get this in your tracks, and what we can do about it. So I think the first thing to start, and this is also a video really about how I wish low end was explained to me when I was starting out, how I had wished sidechaining and really how a kick looks and what does it mean to have it be really tight with your bass, what a bass looks like. So we're hopefully going to cover all of this in the video of today. So to start out with, I'd like to talk about okay, what is a strong low end? That's really your kick and your bass. Well, that's really easy to say. You can just slap on a kick from a sample pack, choose a nice rolling bass or whatever pattern that you really like for your bass, put it together, and you think like, okay, done, but it's not really hitting. Sometimes, yeah, this could be for a variety of reasons, obviously, but I think the best place to start out with is let's look at what a kick looks like, and then let's look at what a bass looks like. So for a kick, I have a couple of kicks laid out here in different keys. So these are all the same kicks but tuned to different keys. So if I loop over this like kick E, we can look at this kick. That's what it sounds like, hitting E. If you look at the frequency, we can see that it has a big hit fundamental here around the E, F sharp area. And then there's all of these like low, mid, high frequencies, because what we hear from a kick is more than just that low end hit, right? But I think more importantly than looking at the equalizer graph of a kick is to look at an oscilloscope. So Shaperbox 3 has a free oscilloscope that you can get. It looks like this. When you open it, you can just press oscilloscope. Please get this. It's a very nice plugin. It's free. There's no excuse not to get it. So if we set this here to 1 bar, well, and then let it play, well, we see 4 kicks. We move it to 1/4, and we see a very stable kick. Now, if I freeze this, and then we look at this kick, what we see is actually a combination of 3 regions for the kick. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger to make sure we all see it. Generally, you have this first part here of the kick called the transient. This is that sharp that you hear and that you really need to be present, because it's actually what influences the higher frequencies and makes sure that your kick is heard. Then you have the body of the kick, which is these very beautiful sine waves that are really that part of the kick that you feel. So these are the low frequency sub. Well, these are generally the low sub frequencies that when you're in a club or a festival and you feel something in your belly or in your heart, this is what you're feeling from the kick. And then we have what is the tail. The tail is really just the end. It's where the end of the kick is moving into silence, right? Generally, I won't talk too much about what a good kick looks like. That could be a nice topic for a next video. But when you're talking about a tight low end and a solid low end, aligning the body and tail with your sub bass is really where it matters. So this frequency here that we're seeing is really the frequency of the kick. So to show this, I actually want to show what happens. Let me think about it. Actually, no, the easiest would be, let's say, do it with the sub bass. So then that's what a kick looks like. If we look at the bass, well, a bass is really a combination of different parts. Obviously, you can have it all in one instrument, or sometimes you can have it in separate instruments. So for this video, I'd really like to focus on the sub bass, because the sub bass is what generally has the most positive or negative interactions with the kick, and what most will affect really your that powerful feeling in the low end that you're trying to get. So if we look at the sub bass, and I have sub basses here in the kick, the key of E, we have like a rolling sub bass. If we freeze this, oh, sorry. If we freeze this, this is what a sub looks like at the E. This frequency is the frequency of E0. So here it says E3, but because we have a serum patch of only a sine wave on the sub, this is what you get. So if we look at that serum patch, here's the sub base, serum. We have a sine wave 3 octaves down, so E3 minus 3 is E0. Very short attack, short release, so that it just plays the sine wave immediately. Yeah, so that's the sine wave, and then that's what we see here. Now, what I wish someone had explained to me before is that the sub, E0, F0, G0, A0, they are all slow-moving waves that are slightly different in their size. So if we look at playing these 4 different notes, and we pay attention, we'll see that actually the size of this wave is going to shrink over time because we're going up in pitch. So if we play this whole loop, we can see that if you pay attention, it's just getting just a bit smaller each time. Now, this is important because these sub-frequencies of our bass are what interacts with that body that we saw of the kick. So if we look up here, these frequencies here will interact with these frequencies here, and then we might or not get phasing. So that's when either things will cancel each other out, or they will positively bring each other up. So if we play now the kick and the bass, what we can see is that with every kick, maybe I'm going to focus on one loop in specific. Let's just focus on the G. We get this really weird looking kick compared to if we turn the sub bass off. A beautiful round kick. And that, again, the reason is the sub frequencies of just the sub are interacting with the body and even the transients of the kick in some weird ways in that first part of the kick. So if we stop here, this is obviously the next part is obviously, well, we can sidechain. And we all know the different kinds of sidechains, and we're going to cover a couple of them here in this video, but I think it's important to understand this is the reason, or at least one of the reasons, that you need to sidechain. Now, there's things you can do before you sidechain, and one of these things is actually phase alignment. So if we stop here for a second, what we can do is, let's just try to align the phase of the sub with the body, the phase of the body of the kick. So we're trying to align these slow moving waves of the sub so that they perfectly, or as close to perfectly, match this body of the kick. So if I go here to my shaper box, I can add a sidechain. So I want to add the kick, and I'm gonna go here, audio, so that I can see the kick always playing. So here we go, we see the kick. If I turn off the bass, what we get is the kick orange is perfectly aligned with the sidechain color. The sidechain orange is perfectly aligned with the kick white that is playing. But now I can actually turn off the kick. It's silent. Oh, turn off the kick. Can I turn off the kick, please? There we go. I can turn off the kick, but because of the sidechain, I can still see the kick. So what I can do now is I can turn on the sub bass. And looking at the sub bass, we can see that that weird kick bass thing we get is because the sub, this white line, is not really well aligned with the kick, or at least the body of the kick, this orange part. So what we can do is something some say is a little bit more pro, but it's actually very simple. I wish, again, someone had showed me this earlier. If we go to the synthesizer where our sub bass is, so 0, is if we actually take this E, for example, to replace the G here, we'll have a kick in E, a kick in G, but the sub bass is going to be in E. This may or may not be a problem. I'm not saying necessarily it's what you want to do, but what we can see is, right, let's copy the same pattern here as we have for the G. So this pattern here just because it gives us a stable sub. Sub in E, now we have a stable. We can see that it's because the frequency of the E and G are slightly different, even though we had previously aligned, this alignment doesn't really match. So what we can do is actually just focus on this area and try to align it again. So going back here, so we're going to try to move it. Let's go back to 0. We can start moving it so we move left. Let's align this part. And if you look at the tail of the kick, we got it pretty close. So here's up and down, and then it's going to fade away. So now hopefully, I hope you understand this kick sub relationship, the phasing, where the power is really lost, and why you need sidechaining. And why you need sidechaining, this frozen thing is perfect, is because of this interaction between the frequencies that you want to remove so that you don't have your sub bass or any other element for that case messing up your kick. Now we understand the kick and bass. We can move on to the next part, which is sidechaining. You probably heard that there's a couple of different kinds of sidechains. So there's like volume-based sidechains, that's the kickstart, duck, shaper box, or just your utility plus envelope variety if you want to be an Ableton purist. Volume-based sidechaining, whatever you want to call it, is really literally turning down the volume of, in this case, your sub bass for a certain portion of your kick. And that portion of your kick is the transient and the body, because that's what you want to hear and feel. The transient you hear, the body you're going to really maybe hear plus feel. So when you look at volume-based sidechaining, you have your kick and you're going to have your sub bass, and then we're going to walk through a couple of the different varieties. Now, my favorite one is shaper box. So shaper box based sidechaining is one where you go and turn it on, you choose your kick. Oh, I have to choose the right kick, which is this one. And if I open it up, I'm going to open up volume because I want to sidechain. And we get this curve. So what you have to understand, or what is nice to understand, is this is 1 bar, this loop I've selected here. And this is set to 1/4 because a kick triggers every 1/4 in electronic music, at least. Maybe it can vary based on your type of music that you're making. So this volume shaping, what it's doing is, if it's like this, there's no volume shaping whatsoever happening. It means for this whole sound, when I let the kick through and I turn on kick and bass, I'm just getting the full sound of both of them coming through. Now, sidechaining with a volume-based shaper is one where, because we want to let that transient and body through, we pick something like this or this. It will vary. And what this will do is, because this is put on the sub bass, when we draw a curve like this, it means for this part, I want you to turn the volume completely down, and then it slowly starts bringing the volume up of, in this case, the sub bass. So if we have this on, and we know that our phase is aligned, well, it isn't actually, so we'll need to align our phase again, because it's the same note, but that was on a different track. So let's quickly align our phase. There we go. There we go. So we see the sub bass here in dark orange, yellow, and our kick sidechain in brighter yellow. So now things are aligned. We can close this down. another tool we can use if you want to be in Ableton is a shaper plus a utility. So we're going to turn this on. We're going to map this to here, map this to the utility. I don't know exactly. So you see a very similar curve here as to here. Obviously with this, it's a little bit harder to get it just right. Okay, let's just keep it like this. It's not my favorite way to do it. So if we do this, and go back to the oscilloscope, so with Shaper, you can have your kick, you map this to the gain, and then this is set to 1/4, so that at every 1/4 it's going to do this shape, and then it's going to modulate the gain of the utility to bring it down. And then you can adjust the modulation amount until roughly your sub is about in line with this. Obviously you can always raise the volume here, lower the volume here, and then that will also give you a similar effect. So that's one way to do it. Not my preferred. I think Shaperbox, just the sidechain, just the volume shaping or a kickstart is pretty cheap, and it saves you a lot of hassle that you get with this. Or you can also get something like a duck that does something very similar, very sometimes affordable, cheap plugin. This is how I started, very similar to Shaperbox. Turn on the sidechain, and then you get your built-in oscilloscope. You can tweak kind of where you'd like this to go. Maybe you want something like this, or present for your kick. Maybe you want something a little bit more like that. Up to you. This will give you that tight low end that you need between your sub and your kick. So we have also what you call dynamic sidechain or spectral sidechaining. There's a couple of different names for it. Yeah, this is really one where instead of shaping the volume to really take away the volume of your sub when the kick is playing, you're actually going to use some form of EQ plugin to remove the frequency content in a certain region when the certain instrument is playing. So I would not recommend doing this for your sub bass, because honestly it's just too prone to still give you a little bit of phasing between the body of the kick or even the transient information. It's just not really the best practice. I would say some people might swear by it. I don't know. So I wouldn't suggest it. But it can be a very good thing to use in other elements that are not necessarily your sub, but have low-end information that is interacting with your kick in a negative way. So that could be that you have your sub bass as this dedicated sine, which I can highly recommend if you don't want to go for something else, obviously. But then you also have this bass or an ARP that have low-end information. So if we quickly play this little loop, sorry, turn this off. Just whatever, some splice loops put together. But what we're going to see is that if we go into this bass loop, this has a little bit of information here in the subs and on your lows. And this can potentially like misinteract, let's say, interact in a negative way with your kick. So you're going to want to remove that. But a volume-based sidechain, so throwing on a Shaperbox or a duck, is going to interfere a bit too much, or you notice that it interferes too much with the sound of this bass loop or the sound of this ARP. So same thing here for the ARP. If I look at the here, this is the EQ for the ARP. then doing this might maybe kill the sound. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe this is exactly what you should be doing. But it may be that you want to keep this around or a combination of the two. So what you can do instead is use a spectral-based sidechain. So these are the different varieties of spectral-based sidechaining. So let's add them to the loop. Let's go in order of ease of use. So maybe start with something like a Pro Q. Turn it on. Here is our ARP. It's the same thing as here actually, but then we're going to sidechain with the kick of the dynamic part. And let's just turn on sidechain here so we can see it. Oops. The red is the kick, and then the purple is our ARP. So what we can do is we see that the kick is interacting here, obviously on the key of the kick, so on the G, if you want to be precise. And then what we can do is we can turn down the kick with this range feature. We can also narrow it so that it doesn't remove more than is necessary. And then we can turn on this sidechain here, external sidechain, so that when the kick plays, it's going to duck this thing dynamically. And what this ensures is that we can remove this information from the ARP or from the base without having to completely low cut it away. So it's still present, but it's not getting in the way of the kick. Alternatively, another way to do this, and an easier way to do this, would be to use something like soothe. So you choose soothe. This is very common, by the way, as well. It's a very good tip. So we know that our kick is somewhere here in the 50, 55, because it's in G. So we can be present in the G. We also know that the kick sometimes appears a little bit in these regions, and this is tweaking to taste, but we chose the sidechain as the kick. We turn the sidechain on here, mixes at 100%. And what this will happen is, because this is turned on, whenever the kick is played, by increasing here the volume to our taste, and also here, we can ensure that these frequencies of the kick are what are being removed, in this case from the bass. And then you can adjust to not alter the content of the sound too much. So this is very similar to the Pro Q, probably the suggested one if you have soothe. Alternatively, you can also use something like Track Spacer, slightly cheaper version, simpler as well, where you can sidechain to the kick. You can choose the region, maybe you only want up to this 2K region. This is on the bass, sidechain the kick. Is being ducked on the kick without removing all of that low end. You can go deeper here and say, oh, I really want to only remove the mids. So I've turned on mid side mode, pan to mid, meaning I only want this plugin to affect the mids. So now we're ducking the mids of the bass loop in junction with the sidechain kick. So close this. The Ableton purist approach for this would be to go at an EQ8 and then turn that on. You know that the frequency of the kick is around 55. So we're going to go 55. And if you don't know the frequency of the kick, there you can check it either with something like Pro Q4. So let's go to our kick, add a Q. That's one way to check it. Alternatively, you can also do it with an EQ 8 and turn this off. Here's the kick. And if you open up this more complex mode and you look there below, G0, 48, 49, 50 hertz is G0 there on the bottom left next to the 0. Okay, so we know it's around 50, not 55. Let's delete this, go back to our bass loop. So at 55, we want this to duck. But we want it to duck dynamically. We don't want to just put it here. Well, this is also an option, but this means that we're going to reduce the volume of the bass all the time in this frequency region. So instead of doing that, we can get something like an envelope follower. And then route this to be sidechain from the kick. And then we're going to go map to gain, and we're going to turn it down by like 50 or so. So when we see, is this the 2? It's unfortunately it's not showing it, but you can see here that the gain is going to be brought down to get it out of the way. It's not my preferred, again, Ableton purist, this will work. I don't love it, but it works. So yeah, use it if you don't want to spend any money ever on plugins. Now, that constitutes the spectral or dynamic bass sidechaining. You can also use the compression, like a compressor, turn it on. Yeah, turn this off so that you're getting all of the content of your sidechain, not just everything above what it was, 80, 90 hertz. So let's just keep it like this, or even put it like this at the max. So you're really getting everything as much as possible. Then the sidechain, we're going to put it to external, select our kick, and here we see our kick. Then you just lower it until it hits about whatever 360 dB, or just use your ears, see what works, see what feels good. And what this is doing is also reducing the volume whenever the kick comes. Now this is a little bit more like volume based / dynamic, because what a compressor is doing is really reducing the volume of the entire sound, so of your entire bass, and not just the low or sub part of your bass, like the other things we use, like a soothe or track spacer. But it's dynamic in that it only works, obviously, when the kick is triggered and according to the parameters you set here in the compressor. Let's not go too deep in compressor on this video. Let's leave that for something else, because I have saved potentially the best for last. This is something new. It's what's called ringmod sidechain. So ring modulation, sidechain. I wish I could explain to you exactly how this works, but even I don't fully or perfectly understand it. There's a beautiful video from Virtual Riot on where you can actually even build your own ringmod sidechain plugin, almost, or Ableton rack. But for this, we're going to use a free plugin called Compactor, that if you don't have, please go to Kilohertz right now and download this plugin. So what this does is it's an extremely accurate form of sidechaining, similar to spectral sidechaining like our Pro Q4 or Soothe, in that it's removing frequency content. But the way it does it is through crazy maths. So it looks at the signal of the sidechain and looks at the frequency content, and then looks at the signal content of your element, in this case, the bass loop. And by using math, it knows exactly how much it needs to remove from the frequency of both signals, but in this case of the bass loop, such that it's perfectly removing to the letter the frequencies that are clashing. Now, the downside of this one is that it can introduce distortion, which, depending on the kind of music you're making, can be desired. But if you're going for softer, maybe a melodic techno or even progressive house, this form of sidechaining might be a bit too aggressive, and then that's where you want to lean on something more like a volume-based sidechaining or dynamic sidechaining for your elements. So look, displaying this is really easy. Choose your kick. Then you're going to choose here the sidechain input 3/4, so that you actually do input. Input's a bit double, but so be it. You have three different types of modes. I would go for intersample peak if you want a good amount of accuracy. And it's as simple as that's it. And then it will start removing the kick from this bass element. You can play, if the sound is just not it, you can play a little bit with the release and the attack. Lower attacks means it's going to be more aggressive in the start. Sound to work with. Experiment with peak and RMS to see what really works for you, and yeah, what fits. But this is a beautiful, fast, easy form of sidechain. You can also play with lowering here the threshold so that it knows when it should be silenced. So instead of going to 0, you can also say, less aggressive, so that the kick is not ducking as much of the bass signal. So you really just have to play with this, play with the attack and release, get a good balance where you hear the kick clearly, but your element is still present, and that you feel like, okay, this sounds good, not so much distortion, I'm happy. So compactor, beautiful, maybe one of my go-tos as well next to Shaperbox. So these are really the different kinds of sidechain. Going back to summarizing, really, sidechain is, in the sense of a low end, in the sense of your kick and your sub bass, really about getting your sub away from the kick during its transient body phase, and then making sure that it's aligned on the tail so that your sub and your kick are just working beautifully together, and the song just hits, and you can really make your next banger. So yeah, I would say, looking at these different types, the way I use them is, for a kick and sub bass, I will likely go with volume sidechaining. I'll try first the ringmod so compactor. If compactor is giving me a really clean, or at least a sonically interesting sidechain, I will just throw that on the bass, sub bass, and use it. If it's introducing these distortion artifacts that I'm not really happy with, then I will go for volume-based sidechaining with Duck or with Shaperbox. Then, if I have another element that is not my sub bass, but that is interfering with my kick, or even with another element, I will go more towards a spectral sidechain to just take a little bit of that portion of frequency content that is interacting without reducing the volume of the element totally. And then, yeah, I might actually just always start with ringmod first. See, is it adding distortion? If it is, go for spectral. But yeah, I think that's how I would do it. I hope this has helped. I hope this video has been somewhat useful. It's been my first video, so thank you for bearing with me if you're here until now. I hope I can continue making videos like this that explain things slowly, maybe a little bit simpler to beginners, but that will help you understand why you should do something, and not just remember, here's 3 tips that you hopefully remember, so that when you're making your own track, you just try and it doesn't really work, but that's exactly what they showed you. But yeah, it doesn't hit. So yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe to this page if you'd enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.